Good morning and welcome to part 2 of our exploration through Linn County, Kansas. If you didn't check out part 1, we were kind of on the eastern side of the county, and now we are kind of heading west and then south. So this is the Cadmus Cemetery. Actually it's called the Elm Grove and Cadmus Cemetery. And Cadmus is the first ghost town we're going to go to just down the road. It's about a mile or two down the road, and there's not too much left of that town. In fact, it was never incorporated. It had about 100 people at the turn of the century and had a post office for about 25 years. Behind me, this is a pretty cool little memorial for many different wars and people honoring people that fought in different wars. So it's kind of a cool thing to see here at this cemetery. So we'll cruise around, check it out, and then we'll start our day heading to Cadmus. Goodrich, Kansas was started kind of as a railroad town, or if it wasn't started that way, it ended up being that. That was kind of the main reason it had some success, and had a post office for about 70 years. So grew to about 100 people at the turn of the century, and then slowly got smaller and smaller, like a lot of these towns do. There's a church here, and it's Sunday morning, so we'll go visit the church and see if there's anybody maybe inside to take a peek. And there's also a cemetery not too far away, so we'll check that out as well. I was just passing through and saw your church. I was just curious to take a look at it. You guys want to wave to be on YouTube?
Yeah.
Farlinville was located just up the road from where I'm standing along a creek slash river, and it was a town that's had about 100 people and had a post office. Originally the post office was in a different town called Ridge. Maybe it might have been Hale Ridge. There's a place we're going to try to find called Hale Ridge later, but I read that it said from Ridge the post office moved to here in the 1890s or right around 1900, and then it was here for 10 or 20 years before it closed. There's nothing left of the community near that creek, but down the street is this community center building, and it also said like District 51, 1920, so I'm assuming this was a school or a location of a school. So kind of neat to find something with Farlinville's name still on it. We have arrived to the community of Linnville, and we're going to talk about a couple towns here that was actually really important to the history of Linn County. So we'll start with Linnville. Linnville actually was the county seat of Linn County for 9 months, from 1865 to 1866. And there was never a post office here. It's right in the middle of the county, so I think that's probably, they were trying to move the county seat around to try to figure out where to put it, and I guess they tried it here, and obviously it didn't last very long. But yeah, there was a small community here. There's a cemetery, you can see back there behind me. There's, I believe, a school was here. This I'm sure was not here at that time because the town lasted a very short amount of time. And going through the cemetery, it's hard to find, the numbers and from 1865, especially when they're that old. But there were a few people that were buried in that time frame back there. So that's an old cemetery. At least that's there's some headstones from those times, and there's some newer ones. So there's obviously a community of people that live in this area and consider Linnville their home, even though there's obviously not a town left anymore. But this school is or community center or whatever it is now, pretty interesting to look at. So now let's talk about another town that was somewhere around here. I don't know exactly where it was located, but we're in Paris Township. And like I said, Paris Township, and this is in the middle of the county. And there was a town named Paris where people had come from Paris, Kentucky to settle, and was originally settled as a pro-slavery town. This was before Kansas was a state and before the Civil War. And so but there was a settlement here for a while. Politics shifted a little bit, and it became more of a free state area. And they definitely wanted this to become the county seat. And there was a vote, and it was between Mound City and Paris, and Mound City narrowly won, something like 507 to 471. And at that time, there were 300 or 400 people that lived in Paris, and they did not want to relinquish the county seat, which they had actually temporarily been named. And so they really thought that was important. Back then, elections, you can imagine, would have been hard to, it would have been easy to see there could have been some shenanigans, I guess, and being the county seat was very, very important back in the day. And so they didn't want to give up the county seat status, and they decided to not give up the records to Mound City. Well, that didn't set well with the people of Mound City, and Charles Jennison, who was known for definitely being aggressive in his tactics back in the day, was going to march his people here and take the records by force. And the people here, they didn't want to have a fight, but technically they call it the Battle of Paris, even though there was no bloodshed. But when the Mound City people got here, apparently the people of Paris said, we don't know where the records are, kind of like playing dumb, like we don't know where they are, they were lost or something like that. And upon further threats, they found the records and they gave them up to Mound City. And that was kind of the beginning of the end. Although a small community, kind of formed a little later. There was a post office a few years later for a very short amount of time. But now there's nothing left of Paris, which is interesting when, they barely lost that county seat election, and now Mound City is still the county seat and Paris no longer exists. Just driving along to my next little dot on the map, and in the middle of nowhere. There's no dots for here, but this is called the Wesley Chapel, and there's a newer cemetery next to it and an older one across the road. So I don't know if this used to be a town, but certainly it's a community. Maybe someone watching this will know what Wesley or this little area in Linn County is all about. Obviously, when people hear the name of a town, Wall Street, immediately you're going to think of New York City, but Kansas obviously has its own Wall Street. A little bit different. It was only around for about 30 years, at least the post office was, and the church is the only thing here now. Obviously, this wasn't here in 1870 when the town started. But yeah, I guess if I was to have to choose between the two Wall Streets that I'm aware of, I'd probably pick this one. So that was kind of funny. Critzer, obviously, it's not a town anymore, but the person who owns the house there has a good sense of humor as the Critzer city limits. But there was a town here. In the 1880s, it was actually named Montgomery originally, and then in 1890 was named Critzer. I think it was after a railroad official because there was a railroad here. And then, it wasn't very large. A couple dozen people, and then faded into what it is today, which is really beautiful out here, and someone has a really nice house right there where Critzer used to be. As we have arrived to where Hale Ridge is, the wind is kicking up. I'm sorry if it's too windy to hear real well. I have a cover on my microphone, so it really is trying to drown out the wind, but it gets windy in Kansas, and this is a windy day. So, but Hale Ridge, this is kind of an interesting place, even though there is nothing remaining of Hale Ridge. It had a post office from 1879 to 1888. Had the post office, a store, and a school. And the school actually operated right here where this intersection is until 1957. And they tried to put schools every 6 miles out here in these rural areas. They thought that was a decent distance. And kids rode their horses to school. They walked to school back then. And I'm sure it was a lot of blustery, windy days like it is today. But it's a beautiful area, and there's definitely nothing left of Hale Ridge. Nearing the conclusion of our day, we are in the Oakwood Cemetery, and Oakwood was located a little bit further from here, down the road a mile or so. Actually went over there. It's a pretty cool place to drive through, right along where on the map I have says that the town used to be, but there's nothing left there to signify there was a town there. But the cemetery here is pretty extensive. It's a large cemetery. The interesting part about the town is that 1858 until the early 1900s had a post office. From 1858 to 1878, the post office would be in different people's farmhouse because they didn't have, really a town to speak of. So that just the post office moved from person to person basically because it was that small. And then they end up having a drugstore, a post office, and a physician. They had a physician in their town. There was a railroad that came through eventually, and then the decline, like all these towns, there was the decline there in the early 1900s. Their population in 1910 was said to be 40, and now all that's left is the cemetery. Well, we have made it to Blue Mound, which is the final town in the southwest corner of the state. So I've gone from the southeast up in the first video to the west and then on down, and this is the last town. This is not a ghost town. A couple hundred people still here. I'm not going to profile it like I have some of these other places, but maybe someday it'll be a Small Town USA video. That's kind of the kind of towns I do in those videos. So, but very interesting. Yesterday, part one, if you watched that, was much more kind of historical about the Bleeding Kansas part, and then part two, which is obviously today, was more kind of the traditional Kansas ghost towns I've seen. Hard for me to pick which one I liked more. I really had fun. This is the second type of video of this I've done. I did Greenwood County in a couple parts, took a couple days, and it's really fun to explore an entire county and try to find every settlement along the way. There were lots of places I saw that had post offices at some point that had no idea where they were, so I couldn't even figure out where to stop and talk about them, but there were certainly more in Linn County. So if there's people watching this that are aware of other places, put them in the comments, and if you know where they're at, and if there's anything historical left, let others know, because what I want this channel to be is for people to learn and for people to share thoughts, and with a kind of common love of history, and especially like this for a common love of kind of rural Kansas. So hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, safe travels. And they do have some old playground equipment, and so kind of an interesting Guys, did you know this bridge was 113 years old? It's so old that World War I hadn't happened yet. It's awesome, ain't it? I was just passing through and saw your church. I was just curious to take a look at it.
What made you stop there?
If there's a little dot on the map, I stop. That's my rule.
Right?
Yeah. So.
So
I actually make YouTube videos. It's kind of gotten fairly popular. A lot of Kansas stuff, a lot of small town stuff. So yeah. So this little town will be in there for a few seconds. So yeah.
Welcome to come back anytime and join us.
I appreciate it.
Coming back around this way, stop on in.
I appreciate it. Woo! Whoa!